Welcome to Horrified Stories, where fear comes to life. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more spine-chilling tales. Let's start our today's story, The Ghost of Room 209, a true hotel horror story. The Silvercrest Hotel had stood for over a century, its towering facade an architectural marvel of the late Victorian era. Guests marveled at its grandeur, intricate carvings, stained glass windows, and a lobby chandelier that cast rainbows across the marble floor. But beneath its opulence, whispers of something sinister had always lingered. Room 209 was at the center of those whispers. The assignment. I wasn't particularly superstitious, but when my editor tasked me with investigating the legend of Room 209 for an article on haunted hotels, I couldn't shake the unease that came with the assignment. Over the years, rumors of strange occurrences, disembodied voices, sudden temperature drops, and guests who fled in the middle of the night had turned their room into local folklore. It's just a story, I told myself as I booked a two-night stay. The hotel receptionist didn't flinch when I requested room 209, but her polite smile faltered for a split second. Of course, she said, typing into her computer, "Enjoy your stay." The first night, I arrived at the Silvercrest Hotel just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across its ornate exterior. The lobby smelled faintly of old wood and lavender polish, the air thick with a history you could almost feel. The bellhop led me to room 209, his silence unbroken as we walked through dimly lit hallways. The walls were lined with antique paintings, each one more unsettling than the last. "Here we are," he said, unlocking the door and stepping aside. His eyes avoided mine. Room 209 was surprisingly ordinary. A queen-sized bed with crisp white sheets, a small desk by the window, and a vintage armchair in the corner. The only thing out of place was the mirror hanging across from the bed. It was large and ornate, its frame etched with strange symbols I didn't recognize. "Anything I should know about this room?" I asked, trying to sound casual. The bellhop hesitated, then shook his head. "Just sleep well." A presence in the dark. The first few hours passed uneventfully. I unpacked my bag, set up my laptop, and began typing out notes for my article. Outside, the city lights glimmered, casting a faint glow into the room. At around 11:30 p.m., I decided to call it a night. I turned off the lights, leaving only the dim glow of the bedside lamp, and crawled into bed. That's when I noticed it. The room had grown cold, and it just chilly, but bone-numbingly cold. I pulled the blanket tighter around me, shivering as my breath turned visible in the air. Then came the sound. It was faint at first, like the rustling of fabric. I strained to listen, my heart pounding as it grew louder. It wasn't fabric, it was breathing. I sat up, scanning the room. The air felt heavy, oppressive, as if something unseen was watching me. My gaze fell on the mirror across from the bed, and my blood ran cold. There, in the reflection, was a figure. It was faint, almost translucent, a woman in a tattered dress, her face obscured by shadows. She stood motionless in the corner of the room, right where the armchair was. I spun around, my eyes locking onto the chair. It was empty. When I turned back to the mirror, she was gone. That journal. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at the desk, typing furiously as I documented every detail of what I had seen. At some point, I noticed something odd, a faint scratching noise coming from the desk drawer. Hesitant, I pulled it open and found an old leather-bound journal. Its pages were yellowed with age, the ink faded but still legible. June 12, 1953. I can't stay in room 209 anymore. The things I've seen, they won't leave me alone. She won't leave me alone. Every night, she's there, staring at me from the mirror. I hear her whispering. She wants me to do something, but I don't know what. The journal entries continued, each one more frantic than the last. Whoever had written them had been driven to the brink of madness by whatever haunted this room. I turned to the final entry, my hands trembling. July 7th, 1953. I can't escape her. She's always there, even when I close my eyes. If you're reading this, leave. Don't let her trap you too. The journal slipped from my hands, falling to the floor with a dull thud. The morning after, by the time the sun rose, the room had returned to normal. The air was warm again, the oppressive feeling gone. I told myself it was just my imagination, fueled by the stories I'd heard and the journal I'd found. But deep down, I knew better. As I stepped out into the hallway, the receptionist was waiting for me, her expression unreadable. "Did you sleep well?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. I hesitated, then nodded. "I'm fine." Her gaze lingered on me for a moment before she replied, "Let us know if you need anything." I returned to the room that evening, determined to uncover the truth about room 209. But as the clock approached midnight, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched and that the ghost of room 209 wasn't finished with me yet. The sun sank behind the horizon, painting the city in hues of crimson and gold. As I prepared for another night in room 209, I couldn't shake the memory of the apparition in the mirror or the desperate journal entries from the previous occupant. But as a journalist, I felt obligated to uncover the truth, no matter how terrifying it might be. Before the night began, I decided to do some research. Armed with my laptop and a cup of bitter hotel coffee, I delved into the Silver Crest Hotel's history, unearthing the past. The Silver Crest was no stranger to tragedy. Built in 1892, it had weathered to fires, a string of unexplained deaths, and whispers of staff and guests vanishing without a trace. Most unsettling was the story of a woman named Margaret Bellamy, who had been a long-term resident of room 209 in the 1930s. Margaret, a reclusive artist, was rumored to have gone mad in the months leading up to her disappearance. Witnesses claimed she spoke of a shadow that lived in the mirror, insisting it had stolen her soul. One morning, the hotel staff entered her room to find it empty except for a shattered mirror and a single word scrawled across the wall in red paint. Hers. Margaret was never seen again. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end as I read. The connection to the mirror in room 209 was undeniable. The mirror's secrets. At 11 p.m., I decided to confront the mirror. Armed with a flashlight and a shaky resolve, I examined the ornate frame. The carvings were intricate, and though the patterns appeared random at first glance, I noticed repeating symbol spirals, jagged lines, and something that resembled an eye. I pressed my hand against the glass. It was icy cold, far colder than the room itself. My breath fogged the surface, and for a moment, I thought I saw movement within the reflection, a flicker of shadow that darted out of view the moment I focused on it. Suddenly, a faint voice whispered from behind me, "Why are you here?" I spun around, but the room was empty. The armchair in the corner creaked as if someone had just shifted their weight in it. The whip remained vacant. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice trembling. The whisper came again, this time louder. "She's watching." A midnight encounter. Midnight arrived, and with it, the oppressive chill I had felt the night before. The room seemed darker somehow, the shadows deeper and more restless. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the mirror. When the air grew heavy, the faint rustling noise returned, followed by a low, guttural groan that seemed to emanate from the walls. And then I saw her. Margaret, or what was left of her, stepped into view within the mirror. Her once beautiful face was gaunt, her eyes hollow and black. She raised a skeletal hand, pointing directly at me. "Help me," she rasped, her voice a mix of desperation and malice. I frowned, unable to look away. Her reflection moved closer, though the room itself remained unchanged. She reached the surface of the glass and pressed her hand against it. The mirror rippled like water, and for a moment, I thought she might emerge. "Take it back," she whispered, "before it's too late." The locked door. As I stumbled backward, the door to the room slammed shut on its own. The lock clicked, trapping me inside. "Let me out!" I shouted, pounding on the door. The lights flickered violently, plunging the room into near total darkness. Only the mirror remained illuminated, its surface glowing faintly. Margaret was gone, but the reflection of the room began to change. The walls twisted, blackened, and melted away, replaced by a desolate void. Shadows moved within the darkness, growing larger and more defined. One shadow stepped forward, towering over the others. His form was human-like but grotesquely distorted, elongated limbs, clawed hands, and glowing red eyes that burned into mine. "You cannot escape," it growled, its voice reverberating through the room. The journal's warning, desperate for answers. I grabbed the journal from the desk. Flipping through its pages, I found a passage I had noticed before. "She is bound to the mirror, and the mirror is bound to her. Break the bond, or you will join her." The entry was followed by a crude sketch of the mirror, with its strange symbols encircled. Beneath the sketch were the words, "The symbols are the key. Destroy them." The ritual. I scrambled to the mirror, tracing the symbols with my fingers. Each one seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy, and touching them sent a shock up my arm. The shadows in the mirror grew restless, their movements frantic. The towering figure roared, its claws scraping against the inside of the glass as if it were trying to break through. I grabbed a penknife from my bag and began carving into the frame, scratching out the symbols one by one. With each mark, the room trembled, and the shadows screamed in rage. "Stop," a voice commanded, but I didn't. As I reached the final symbol, the mirror's surface began to crack. The figure inside lunged forward, its claws just inches from my face. With one final stroke, the symbol was destroyed, and the mirror shattered into 1,000 pieces. Aftermath. The room fell silent. The oppressive chill was gone, replaced by a sudden warmth. The shattered mirror lay in fragments on the floor, each shard reflecting nothing but my own terrified face. I picked up the journal, only to find its pages blank. Whatever curse had bound room 209 seemed to have been broken, or so I hoped. But as I stepped into the hallway, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching me. Breaking the mirror in room 209 had silenced the haunting for a moment, but the sense of relief was fleeting. The room might have been still, but the oppressive atmosphere clung to me like a second skin. Something wasn't right, something lingered. I gathered my belongings and left the room, determined to check out of the hotel and leave the silver crest behind. But as I walked through the dimly lit hallway, I couldn't escape the feeling that I wasn't alone. The unseen companion. The elevator ride down to the lobby was unnervingly slow. The dim, flickering light overhead cast long, jittery shadows across the polished brass walls. Each floor dinged as the elevator descended, but on the fourth floor, the doors opened on their own. The hallway beyond was empty. "Come on," I muttered, jabbing the close button. Just as the doors began to slide shut, I caught a fleeting glimpse of movement, a shadow that darted across the floor, too fast and too unnatural to be human. The doors closed, and the elevator continued its descent, but the air felt colder, and a faint whisper echoed behind me. "You didn't end it." I spun around, but the elevator was empty. A false escape. The lobby was quiet when I arrived, the usual hum of late-night guests absent. The receptionist was gone, the desk abandoned, a single suitcase Saturday in the corner, its owner nowhere in sight. "Hello," I called out. The echo of my voice was the only reply. I approached the desk, intending to leave my key and go, but something caught my eye. On the polished wood surface was a single sheet of paper, folded neatly. My name was scrawled on the front in an unsteady hand. With trembling fingers, I unfolded the note. You think you've escaped, but the shadow follows. It always follows. The key slipped from my hand and clattered onto the marble floor. A history of shadows. Determined to make sense of what was happening, I left the hotel and Saturday in my car, my hands gripping the steering wheel as I stared at the building. The silver crest looked innocent in the faint glow of the streetlights, but I knew better. I pulled out my phone and searched deeper into the hotel's history. Article after article mentioned disappearances, unexplained deaths, and accounts of a shadowy figure reported by guests and staff alike. One article from 1954 caught my attention. It described the aftermath of Margaret Bellamy's disappearance and included a quote from a former housekeeper. The mirror in room 209 isn't just haunted, it's a door. Something lives on the other side, and it doesn't let go. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Destroying the mirror hadn't freed me, that set something loose. The pursuit begins. I started my car and pulled away from the hotel, determined to put as much distance between myself and room 209 as possible. The streets were eerily empty, and the further I drove, the darker it seemed to get. After about 20 minutes, I realized something was wrong. The streets were unfamiliar, and the landmarks I'd passed earlier seemed to have vanished. It was as though the town itself was shifting around me. My headlights flickered, and for a brief moment, the figure of a woman appeared in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a stop. When I looked up, she was gone. The shadows cast by my headlights began to move, writhing and twisting like living things. The faint whisper returned, louder now, repeating the same chilling phrase. You didn't end it. The shadows came, desperate. I drove back toward the hotel, hoping that retracing my steps would somehow make the whisper stop. But no matter how far I drove, the silver crest remained out of reach. I finally pulled over, stepping out into the cold night air. My breath thawed in front of me as I looked around, trying to get my bearings. That's when I saw it, my shadow, stretching unnaturally long under the dim glow of a nearby street lamp. It moved on its own. Leave me alone, I shouted, backing away. The shadow twisted, its form shifting into something grotesque. It no longer resembled me, but had become a towering, clawed figure with glowing red eyes. You brought this upon yourself, it growled. A clue in the journal. In my desperation, I remembered the journal I had taken from room 209. I retrieved it from my bag and flipped through its blank pages, hoping for some kind of answer. As I held it under the light, faint writing began to appear, as though written in invisible ink. The words sent a chill down my spine. The mirror was the key, but the shadow is the lock. To break the curse, you must return to where it began. You must finish what Margaret could not. A reluctant return. With no other choice, I turned the car around and drove back to the Silver Crest. The hotel loomed larger than ever, its windows like dark, hollow eyes. The lobby was still empty when I entered, but this time, the air was thick with an unnatural stillness. My footsteps echoed loudly as I made my way back to room 209. The door was ajar, and the room beyond was bathed in an eerie blue light. Inside, the shards of the broken mirror had reassembled themselves, forming a fractured yet functional reflection. The symbols I had destroyed were restored, glowing faintly as if mocking my earlier efforts. The shadow stood before the mirror, its towering form blocking the light. You cannot undo this, it said. You belong to me now. The shadow in room 209 loomed over the reassembled mirror, its glowing red eyes locked onto mine. The oppressive atmosphere felt heavier than ever, as though the room itself were alive and suffocating me. I stood frown-seen in the doorway, my mind racing for an escape. but deep down, I knew there was none. I had unleashed this, and now I had to face it. The bargain, the shadow spoke, his voice a guttural mix of rage and mockery. You sought the truth, and now you found it, but that truth has a price. What do you want? I demanded, my voice trembling. To be free, it hissed, gesturing toward the mirror. Break the cycle, return what was taken, and I will leave you unharmed. The shadow's words sent a chill through me. What had Margaret taken? What had I disturbed? I glanced at the journal in my hand, hoping for another clue. The once blank pages now showed frantic scrawls. The words set her free, written over and over again. Margaret, I whispered, she's trapped, isn't she? The shadow's silence was answer enough. Margaret's plea. The mirror shimmered, and Margaret's gaunt reflection appeared again. Her hollow eyes filled with sorrow. She pressed her hands against the glass, her lips moving soundlessly. I stepped closer, the pull of her gaze irresistible. As I neared the mirror, her whispers grew louder, overlapping and frantic. Don't trust him. Don't trust the shadow. He lies. He wants to trap you, just as it trapped me. What am I supposed to do? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Margaret's reflection looked behind her, as though the shadow might hear her words, and then she mouthed a single phrase. Destroy the mirror, completely. A dangerous gamble, the shadow roared, its claws raking across the walls as if it had heard Margaret's silent plea. The lights in the room flickered violently, plunging me into alternating darkness and blinding light. She is mine, the shadow bellowed. You cannot take her from me. My mind raced. If destroying the mirror would free Margaret, then it might also break the shadow's hold. But what if Margaret was wrong? What if destroying the mirror only unleashed the shadow fully into my world? I had no time to deliberate. The shadow lunged at me, its claws narrowly missing as I dived for the desk where the penknife still lay. The fight for freedom. The shadow twisted and roared, its form splintering into fragments that danced across the walls. It was everywhere and nowhere at once, its red eyes burning through the darkness. I grabbed the penknife and turned to the mirror, plunging the blade into the center of one of the glowing symbols. The mirror cracked, sending a pulse of energy through the room that knocked me off my feet. No, the shadow howled, its voice shaking the walls. I scrambled back to my feet, carving into another symbol, and another. Each strike made the room quake, the air growing colder and heavier with every shattered piece of glass. Margaret's reflection flickered, her hollow eyes filling with something that resembled hope. Keep going, she urged, her voice finally audible over the chaos. The mirror shatters. With one final strike, I carved through the largest symbol at the top of the mirror. The glass exploded outward, shards flying in every direction. I shielded my face, feeling the sting of tiny cuts as the pieces rained down around me. The room fell silent. When I opened my eyes, the shadow was gone. The mirror frame was empty, its surface reduced to jagged fragments that no longer reflected anything. Margaret's image had vanished as well. Is it over? I whispered, my voice trembling. But the stillness didn't last. The final warning, a low rumble shook the room, and a voice echoed from the void where the mirror had been. You freed her, but the debt is yours now. The shadow never disappears, it only finds a new host. My blood ran cold. Before I could react, the remaining shards of glass began to glow, their jagged edges forming a spiral that seemed to pull the darkness into itself. The air turned thick, suffocating, as the remnants of the shadow swirled toward me. I tried to back away, but it was too late. The darkness rushed into me, filling my lungs, my veins, my very soul. The weight of it was unbearable, a crushing presence that whispered endlessly in my mind. You belong to me now. A new haunting. When I finally stumbled out of room 209, the hotel seemed eerily normal. The lights were steady, air warm, and the oppressive atmosphere was gone. But I could feel its shadow within me. It whispered constantly, its voice low and insidious, reminding me that I had become part of the curse. I fled the hotel that night, vowing never to return. But no matter where I go, the shadow follows. I see it in my reflection, lurking just behind my eyes. I hear it in the whispers that come when I'm alone, reminding me of the debt I can never repay. And I know that one day, when the time comes, the shadow will take me just as it took Margaret. I had hoped that leaving the silver crest behind would allow me to escape the shadow's grip. I thought the further I traveled, the weaker it would become until it was nothing more than a distant memory. But I was wrong. The shadow never lets go. The dreams began. A nightmare started a week after I left the hotel. At first, they were subtle flickers of movement in the corner of my vision, whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. But soon, the dreams grew more vivid, more intense. In each one, I was back in room 209. The mirror was intact, its surface smooth and untouched. The shadow was waiting for me, its eyes glowing with malice. It would chase me through the darkened hallways of the hotel, its claws scraping against the walls, its voice booming in my ears. You belong to me now. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, my heart racing, but even when I opened my eyes, I could feel it was there. The shadow was always with me. The return of Margaret. Then came the visions. Margaret's face would appear in the mirror, her hollow eyes staring at me with a mixture of pity and sorrow. She would reach out, her fingers brushing against the glass as if begging me for help. You can't escape, she would whisper. He will come for you. He always comes for the ones who break the curse. One night, I could hear her voice clearly, as if she were standing beside me. It's not over, she said, her tone urgent. You think you freed me, but in doing so, you've bound yourself to him. You must end it. You must find the source. But what source? How could I undo what had already been done? The final revelation. As the days passed, the shadow's presence became more oppressive. It would follow me from room to room, from city to city, until I was always looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next sign, the next whisper. It was as though it had become part of me, an extension of my very being. I could no longer tell where I ended and it began. In a final desperate attempt, I returned to the Silver Crest. I didn't know what I was hoping to find, but something deep within me told me the answers lay within the hotel itself. As I entered the lobby, the air was thick with a sense of déjà vu. The receptionist, the same woman who had checked me in weeks ago, barely glanced up. Room 209, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She nodded without question and handed me the key. The final confrontation, room 209, was just as I remembered, its same eerie quiet, the same oppressive darkness. But this time, there was no broken mirror, no shattered glass. It was whole. I stepped inside, and the door slammed shut behind me. The shadows in the room seemed to stretch, curling around the edges like fingers, beckoning me closer to the mirror. The reflection that greeted me was not my own. It was Margaret, standing in front of the mirror, her face twisted in pain and terror. You're too late, she whispered, her voice fading. He has taken you. The shadow is now you. I felt the pull again stronger than ever. The shadow was rising within me, its form consuming my thoughts, my soul. It had been waiting. It had been feeding off my fear. And then I understood. I had never truly escaped. The final choice. In that moment, I had a choice. I could become the shadow, or I could destroy myself. I reached for the mirror, my reflection warping before my eyes. The shadow swirled inside me, whispering promises of power, of control. It would take me, make me its hostage vessel, but at what cost? I could feel the darkness choking me, taking away everything that was left of the person I had once been. The fear that had driven me here was nothing compared to the despair I now felt. But Margaret's face, her tortured expression, reminded me of the one thing that had kept me going. She had never truly escaped either. She had been trapped, just as I would be if I gave in. With every ounce of strength I had left, I made my decision. I grabbed the remnants of the broken mirror and drove them into the glass, shattering it once again. The end of the cycle, the shadow screamed. It howled in rage as the mirror shattered into 1,000 pieces, each one reflecting the twisted form of the creature I had become. But as the shards fell to the floor, a light bright and pure burst from the center, enveloping everything. I felt the darkness dissolve, its presence leaving me. The air in the room grew warm again, and the shadows retreated, as if they were afraid of the light. And then, it was over. The mirror lay shattered on the floor, and the oppressive weight that had followed me for so long was gone. But as I stepped away from the broken pieces, a new reflection appeared that I didn't recognize. It was me, but it wasn't. I had done it. I had ended the curse, but at the cost of my own identity. A new beginning. I left the Silver Crest for good, never to return. But as I looked back, the hotel seemed to fade into the shadows, as if it had never existed at all. But I knew better. The Silver Crest would always be there waiting for the next soul desperate enough to break the cycle, and the shadow would always be watching, waiting for the next person to unleash it, to become part of its twisted reality. And so, I keep moving forward. But the darkness lingers, always at the edge of my mind, reminding me that no matter how far I run, no matter how much I try to forget, the price of freedom is never truly paid. Final thoughts. The Silver Crest Hotel stands as a testament to the dangers of seeking answers where some things are better left unknown. It's a place where reality bends and where the boundaries between the living and the dead are no longer clear. And for those who think they can escape, the shadow will always find you. If you like this story, don't forget to hit the like button, share and subscribe the channel. Help us grow. Thanks for watching.